Oh, right, okay. Good afternoon and welcome to another Derivan Artist Talk. Today we're really excited because our artist is Kerrie Lester. Kerrie has been exhibiting her distinctive scenes of fleeting moments in everyday life since the 1970s. Kerrie's had a yearly solo exhibition since 1976 and has been part of numerous group shows. She's been in the Archibald 17 consecutive times. She's also been in the Portia Guiche Prize, the Doug Moran Portrait Prize, the Solomon and the Wynne.
And the Dobell.
And the Dobell. In 2011, Kerrie won the Mossman Art Prize in Sydney. And I could go on, but I won't, because I'll let Kerrie tell you. Welcome, Kerrie.
Thank you. Well, basically, I'm just going to talk about my brilliant career. And I went straight from school to art school, National Art School. We had to do, in those days, we had to do a year where you did everything in 1 year. So the first year we did it was at Seaforth TAFE. Everyone was at regional TAFEs, and then they got sent to National Art School in second year, and you had to choose what you were majoring in. I went straight to National Art School, and I was there for, so I did that for 4 years. In my final year at art school, Kim Benithan, who had Benithan Galleries in Sydney at that time, came to the art school and chose me to have an exhibition at Benithan Galleries. So my first show was when I was still a student at Benithan Galleries. This is a piece that I did, is it? Yeah. This is a piece, oh, it's a bit curvy at the bottom, isn't it? It's not curved like that, it's straight. This is a piece I did when I was at art school and we went to the zoo. You can't see it very well, but that's a etching plate with all the names of the animals all etched into the etching plate, and that's a sack from the zoo. And this is when I started doing sewing all the names of the animals. So as you'll see, all my early work was collage, found objects, everything that I saw and found, I put it all together. And this was from the zoo. So I did this when I was about 19. And then after I left art school, we had a studio in Bank Street in North Sydney. And this was a house down the road that burnt down, and they were the windows. And so this is a drawing. I do everything a bit left of centre. So this is a drawing on canvas, and there's stencils off the old wool bales that I found, and they used to use them to put the names on the wool bales. So yeah, it's plucked pieces. So everything I did at this time was all collage. I did painting at art school, but when I had my first show at Benithan's, it was mainly found objects. In that show, I had 2 pieces bought by the National Gallery while I was still a student, so it sort of went from there. This was after I had the show at Benithan Galleries. It shut down and went to Adelaide, and then I changed to Hogarth Galleries, and this is a piece I did at Hogarth Galleries of all the show ribbons, and it's called Down Under, Done Up, and it was all the show ribbons. And I used to go around to factories and these tea towels and put them. This is Union Carbide bags. So all my work is basically social comment. I talk about everything that I see that happens around me, stories that people tell me, things that I find. So at this time, when I had to find objects, the objects would tell me what that piece was about. So my work very heavily relied on the found object. These are just some old, the bottom one's tin grasshoppers that I found down in Dixon Street, and put them in an old mirror, and the top's just a collection of Boy Scout badges on an old flower bag. This was a piece that was in a question in the high school certificate, and it's just commenting about all the red brick houses that we see everywhere around us. So my work is about everything that's very familiar to us. Like if you take a dog for a walk in the park and the dog pees on the tree, you look at the tree, but mostly you just pass by all these things. And I talk about all the stuff that we just take for granted. So really I'm just pointing out the obvious, but I'm talking about things that are everyday to us and just the world that we're surrounded by. This was the first portrait I did in the Archibald Prize of a friend of mine, Warren Fay, and his dog, and I never thought that I'd get hung in the Archibald Prize because I did stitching. So from doing the found objects, I used to sew the pieces onto the canvas. After I'd gone through the stage of collections of things, I started sewing things onto the canvas, and through that came the stitching process that I still do today. And I love it because it sort of slaps you in the face. It's very strong and it makes the paintings three-dimensional and stand apart from other people's work. So it's very individual. I was criticised a lot for it at the time as being craft, but now it's become an accepted mark, and they actually teach it at COFA as a mark. So the CDs around the edge, he was the director of a music company, and the CDs were called That's Australia, and I just thought that was very much him. So it was quite beautiful when it was in the art gallery because the lights shone on the CDs, and they had sort of rainbow things come off the CDs, so it was beautiful, yeah. But I'd had children. When I had children, the stitching thing became really great for me because I'm so obsessed by my work. My practice is every day, all day. It's my life, it's the air I breathe, and the stitching became something that I could take with me, so I could always have my work with me. And so when I went to swimming lessons and tennis lessons and everything, I could sit there and manically stitch little pieces of canvas and bring them home and turn them into pieces of art. That red brick house that was before, that also was a drawing, but it's through stencils. I just use stencils for the drawing. Then I did I painted in white paint for about 5 years, although the white paint is still very much strong in my work today because I use it as a spatial element in the canvases and in the work that I do. So I went through a stage, I painted only in white paint for 5 years, but there is not very many photographs of them because being all white, they were just stitched, and I did things like maps of cities and house, 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 and street, 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 and just wrote the name of what was happening in the stitching. So I used words a lot. This is when the word thing started happening, and this is one of the first paintings when I started using colour. So this is how it's gradually come to the work that I do today. But I found that if you wrote the word, people would visually see, if you write tree, people visually see a tree just because you've got the word there. So this was at an exhibition I did called Not Another Exhibition, and every single thing, I think this is not another swimming pool or something. Yeah, so this is where all the words started happening in my paintings here, and I still use words today because I think that they over-exaggerate. I think I exaggerate a lot of what I do because our light in Australia is so exaggerated. That's why I like bright colours. The light here, if you come back from overseas, the light in Australia is so strong and so bright, and I think that that everything we see is exaggerated. I've lived in Europe a couple of times, and coming back to Australia, everything seems to be exaggerated, so I exaggerate a lot in my paintings. This is when I was living in Italy with my children, and those Kinder Surprise, the little Kinder Surprise eggs, they have those toys inside them, and they were everywhere all around the house, and I was always throwing them away. And then one day I thought, oh well, this is great, I'll use this. So these pieces, this is about 30 years old, because in 2 years I'll have been exhibiting for 40 years. I'll be having a 40-year survey show at Maitland Regional Gallery in 2015. This is a piece made out of an old cast screen, back screen window. It's called To Mother and Dad, and the bottom is a speedometer, but I put it on a sewing machine thing, so when you move the treadle, it made the speedometer move, and all the decals on the back windows of cars, of going on holidays with my parents when I was little and looking at the cars in front. They always used to have all these decals on the front of on the backs of the windscreen. This is some bread tags that you get every day on the bread tags. So yeah, this was another exhibition that I did, a whole exhibition of just sewn bits of canvas. So all those bread tags are actually sewn onto the canvas underneath there. This is from that same exhibition, not another painting. This was another painting that I actually cut up, so it was very thick pieces of paint just squeezed out, and it's like when you go to an exhibition. I mean, I went to Europe and I did Not Another Cathedral, and so it was all a whole exhibition about Not Another. This is a portrait of Margaret Fink, who was the producer of my brilliant career. And this is actually in the National Portrait Gallery. I've got 5 portraits in the National Portrait Gallery. And the banner that she's wearing is Soirée de Gala. She always wore Sonia Rykiel's clothes. And that's done in little diamantes, and I pushed them all into the paint. So still very textural, everything. I love text. I like the paint to speak to you, everything about the paint to be, you know, talking about the ideas that you have through the way that you use the paint. This was in the Sulman Prize. It's called Sticks and Stones Can Break My Bones and Words Will Never Hurt Me. So instead of stitching the words, they're all made out of little sticks, and I stuck them down, and they're stones along the bottom there, and at the top there's stones stuck on. But they're on 2 old doors that I found on a rubbish clean-up, so they're quite tall. They're bigger than that, taller than that sign there. I do a lot of little wooden sculptures. I still make these today, although the ones that I do now are quite different. And these are just ones that I put together off all random pieces of wood that I find, and I just stick them together and make them into some object, but they're painted with oil paint. I basically work in oil paint all the time because I love the transparency of it, and I build layers and layers of colours so that I get the transparency, and the colours are very intense because I'm using like 3 and 4 colours underneath the colours that I use on the top. This is a portrait of Fred Hollows. This was in the Archibald Prize. All these portraits have been in the Archibald. This is in the National Portrait Gallery as well. You know, through doing the portraits, I've met amazing people, and I've been very lucky to you know, spend time with these people. When I painted Fred, I went out to the hospital where he worked, and he was dying at the time, and he was just in his world. You know, I showed him my folder of what the portraits that I'd done to show him what sort of work I do, and he, you know, he wasn't interested. Margaret Fink, yeah, who's that? Who's this? You know, and then he said, oh, Burnham Burnham. I'd done one of Burnham Burnham. He was an Aboriginal storyteller, and immediately went, oh yeah, okay, you can paint my portrait now because he'd done Burnham Burnham. I went, oh great, okay. So because he did a lot of work with the Aboriginals, so he called him some other name, I forget what it was actually. Yeah, but he was a very interesting character, and he smoked a pipe, and he always had the pipe hanging out the corner of his mouth. So I like to paint beyond what I see of the person, so their mannerisms and the way that they stand and the way they hold their head and, you know, the way they move is a lot to do, and I like to put that in the portraits. This is a watercolour on paper. it's also, I sew everything that I do. So when I say I sew, I put the canvas up on the wall, and in the crinkles I see something like Mr. Squiggle, and I draw an outline on the canvas, and then I sit and stitch it with cooking twine. And I used to use a very expensive, poly cotton thing, but I found cooking twine's just as good, and so I use that now. And yeah, this was a works on paper exhibition, but it'll probably be my only works on paper exhibition that I ever do, because whereas if you've got a piece of canvas, you can scrunch it up in your lap and do it like that. With a piece of paper, it's so difficult to get the needle up into yeah, I probably won't do it again. She's got real mirrors around her neck, and I actually have this hanging in my hallway at home, so it's called Ready, so as I'm walking out the door I can look in the mirrors and see what I look like. This is at the Children's Hospital at Westmead, and it's about, this is more how I paint now. It's about a laugh, and when you laugh, how you don't see anything, it's just your whole world's into this laugh. So, and the letters are a box of old letters that I got that are used to be used for outside picture theatres when they said the names of what the movie was on. So yeah, I used them for a while in quite a lot of things, and that's an old thong that I probably found on the beach somewhere. So yeah, well, that's in the Children's Hospital though, so it's good because it makes the children. I actually had a beautiful poem that one of the children wrote there that they gave to me about the painting. This is another portrait that was in the Archibald Prize. This is Peter Weiss, who's an arts patron, and the Australian Chamber Orchestra. That's Richard Tognetti in the front playing the violin. And I went out to where they rehearse at King's Cross and stayed in the rehearsal, and Peter was lying on the stairs watching them, listening to them, and so it was, but this was a massive portrait because there's actually 13 people in this portrait. And it was really a lot of work to do the stitching and get it all right. And, like, people are so critical in the Archibald Prize. I had to have every string on how many strings are on a violin and how many strings are on a cello. And so, yeah, so you had to have that pretty. But you can see as the paintings go along that white is very dominant in my paintings to give it a spatial, to give it a break in the paint. This is a self-portrait I did that won the Packers Prize. This was about 25 years ago, something like that. They used to call me the Archibald Bridesmaid because I came second so many times. And so this is self-portrait as a bridesmaid. And it was just a whole lot of flowers I had in the studio one day, and I was just got a friend to photograph me chucking them over my hair. And this chair, that's my chair that I have in the studio, and everyone that comes around to my studio sits in that chair. And so that's a real canvas on the side, pieces of wood just sewn onto the canvas. This is a piece that is done, it's just cut out, it's pinned onto the wall. So it's still stitched and still, but it's just pinned onto the wall without having a canvas, stretched on a canvas. This is a woodblock print. I like anything textural, anything to do. I have to build everything that I do. I don't like just doing straight away like drawings. They're always something weird about them, so I have to build everything that I do. So woodblock printing really works well for me because I have to sit and carve all the plates, and that's part of the process, of the end process. So that was my son after we went to a restaurant at Woi Woi, and he caught a fish off the side of the wharf while we were eating lunch. This was in the Wynne Prize. It's of as you drive down to Canberra and all the cows on the side of the hills and everything. And in the middle, that's a tapestry that I found in a Vincent de Paul shop. And it was a half-done tapestry of old English houses, and I thought that was very like Mittagong, Bowral, all that sort of thing. So, yeah, but you see all those cows and sheep always up on the hills, and that's the Waratahs at the bottom. So, and I use the stitching there like to be the fences. This is also in the National Portrait Gallery. This is James Morrison. He's a multi-instrumentalist, and when I went to see him, you can't actually see, but it's quite beautiful, the light on the side of his head. But when I went to see him to do the portrait, I had to go to the basement where he was performing, and it was about 2 o'clock in the morning, and it was all really dark, and so I tried to get the mood of like the basement into the painting. He plays all sorts of different instruments. He doesn't just play one instrument. So a lot of people that I've painted, Richard Tognetti shaved his head off as I painted him. James Morrison had a little plait, and he shaved his head in the middle of me painting him. So it must be some funny thing that I do, you know. This is a painting of the Spit Bridge at Mossman. I found all these old floats and things that someone had made on a rubbish clean-up night, and they're really beautiful. Some are made out of porcupine quills, and they're all hand-woven and stuff. So you're not allowed to fish off the Spit Bridge, but about 20 years ago there used to every night be always people fishing off the side of the bridge, and I just thought it was a funny thing that's all the strings go down to the floats, of all the people, you know, you're not allowed to breathe there really, no dogs, no fishing, no this, no that. That's a real fishing line on the side, and it's quite a lot of textural. I use wood a lot to stick pieces of wood onto canvases to play with the perspectives and to push things, as I said, exaggerate, push things a lot into your face, you know, of what you're doing. As I said, I like everything to slap you in the face. So. And then it starts on the paintings that I paint sort of more how I paint now. So I like the paint to speak to you about what the mood of the painting is. So I move the paint a lot I love this painting. This is down at Pittwater, going across to Mackerel Beach, waiting for the ferry. And that's a real piece of rope across the front. So I talk a lot about what I see, everything that happens around me, and I paint mostly about water and the harbour because I grew up, I was the token boy in my family. We had 4 girls, and my father used to drag me out on his boat fishing and the whole time at Bobbin Head, and we always, had to wake up at 4 o'clock in the morning and go fishing, and so I have a real attraction to the water, and I live near the water, and so I paint about that all the time. This was when I was driving up to Queensland, and you look out across the fields of, this is pineapple. This is a pineapple plantation, and the bottom bit's a dam, and it's reflected in the dam. But I actually wove the canvas. It's all woven through sticks, so to give it more texture. But it's just about that multiples, like I'm really interested in multiples and like things being all put together, like the shells of the paint behind there, and that's very. I like all that. I've done a whole series of boats. And this is one of the boats that I did. It's very much like the boat Jessica, that girl that sailed around the boat in the pink boat, but I did it before she did it. But I haven't got any photos, but I have done a whole series of boats where I, put the sails on and I paint on the sails about, people drinking and out in the harbour on the boats. And this is one of the boats. This is another boat. I wanted to put barnacles. Actually, someone said to me, "Oh, did you find it like that?" I went, "Yeah, right. I don't think so." It's an old hull that I found, and I wanted to put barnacles all over like it had been in the water for a long time. But barnacles are protected, so you know, I was searching everywhere. Actually, now you see them everywhere in the markets, but at the time I was searching everywhere for them, and I was up at Soldiers Point, and when we went out to lunch there, and I just looked over, it was a marina, and I just looked, and there was this rope that was covered in barnacles, and I said to the man, "I'll give you $100 for the rope." "Oh, no, you can't have that, no." I said, "Oh, well, I just want the barnacles." He said, "Oh, well, you can sit there and pull them all off." He wouldn't give me the piece of rope. So I had to sit there and pull them all off, and then I had a friend of mine who's a sculptor made the trailer for me, and I stuck all the barnacles on with glue. Yeah, I love that too. That's just called hull. This is made out of children's building blocks, and it's about all the blocks of apartment blocks. So I stuck them back in the box that they came in for the children's blocks, and it's just an image of like apartment blocks that you see everywhere. This is another. I've done a lot of work with the ballasts. I find a lot. I live near the harbour, so everywhere in the water, you don't see them so much everywhere anymore, but there's all ballasts out of the old boats. They used to use big blocks of wood, and they're all beautifully textured from the water. So yeah, this is treading water. So, but it's beautiful how it's got the texture of the water on the actual piece of wood. So I love those pieces of wood. You just don't find them anymore, and that's an old Barbie head that I found in a market somewhere. I'm always looking everywhere, stopping at every rubbish clean-up. A bit like a bowerbird, just collecting stuff all the time. And as I said, like all my work used to rely on finding the object, and that would tell me how to. And then I started cutting out and actually making the object out of canvas and writing the object. And now I don't really use found objects on the paintings. I tend to paint them into the paintings. And I did the first artist residency at the zoo, and we stayed the night at the zoo and walked around the zoo in the middle of the night and with a man with a torch, and looked at all the Kokoda dragon and everything at night. So this is about when we stayed there and the night noises at the zoo, all the animals. And this is the same, it's from the zoo. I loved painting at the zoo. I loved the zoo, gave me lots of ideas. It was sort of really new imagery for me, and yeah, I really loved it. This is just about, I walk down at the harbour every morning and I see all the people swimming, and you know, so I comment a lot on that. And, so that's butterflies from the $2 shop, and I stuck them on the canvas, and yeah, I think that's that. Now I've got to find. I don't know which one it is. 2010. Yep, so this is 2010. I think this is my last exhibition that I had in 2010. I'm having another show in 2011 I had a show, so this must be that. And as you see, they're just everything that happens around me. And if you want to ask any questions, feel free.
How big are these?
These ones are 12 by, this is 12 by 12. I do them up to about, that Peter Weiss one was 8 foot long, but usually the biggest ones I do are about 6 foot, 6.5 foot. 7 foot by 6 and things like that. Yeah, people don't really love big paintings anymore, and I used to do really big paintings, but as people, it's not so much in vogue now to have such huge paintings, although it's much easier to do a big painting because you can spread out, and I love it, yeah. So these little ones actually take longer to do than the big ones because it's very fiddly doing stitching and... this is under fairy lights. It was in the window, so that's why it's got a reflection on it. This was down in Melbourne, this exhibition.
Why is your signature back to front?
Because in the earlier work where I did all writing, I found it too distracting to have the Lester at the bottom. It sort of just detracted from the writing. But really the main reason is it's comfortable to put the L in the corner, and it looks really uncomfortable to have this L sticking in the middle of the canvas. So I've done it ever since I was at art school, so yeah, I never could get the signature thing together, and I've tried to not sign it, but people like me to have that sort of quirky signature there now. They're used to it. So. And as you can see, they're just all images that I see of around me, everything that happens around me as I go around, and I put it all. This is an old dog that walks around down at the park, and it walks in a really hunched way because it's really old, so I just thought that's quite interesting. That's called Meet and Greet. This is too. At the mooring. Yoga. I'll just flick through them because these are some I'm starting to do without stitching, but I've sort of mainly gone back to the stitching now, half stitching and half. I don't stitch nearly as much as I used to when I first started, and I try and just do things without so much stitching. So.
Do you paint over the stitching at all?
Yes, like about 5 times, because I layer the paint, as I said, to get lots of colour, to get the colours to be... Oil paint's transparent, so if you put a lot of undercolours, it comes through and brightens the colours even more. And then I paint the stitching with a mixture of brown and black. So I set up the canvas and put it all in, and then I repaint the canvas, and so I have to do it again. So I probably paint the stitching about 3 times in every piece. They take quite a long time to do because by the time I sit and stitch it all, and this is painted on some old Scottish golf clubs that I found in a market and stitched them onto the canvas. They're turn of the century golf clubs. They're quite beautiful. That's a painting without stitching. Everything, as you see, everything that I find, I just found this old frame. You can't see really in that photo, but it's a window. It's got a little latch on it, and so it's supposed to be through the window of a man reading. This is another drawing. I did 3 of them, 3 birds, birdie, pecker and chick. And I cut out the shapes with wood. The drawing that I did for the Dobell Prize was on an old iPhone, and it was called FaceTime, and I just drew a face on the front of the iPhone. So yeah, I use objects that are very everyday to us and imagery that's very everyday to us. These are stitched, the flowers, but behind's not stitched, so that's just painted. That's pigeonhole. I love birds. I'll show you in a minute. The next, I did a whole. I don't really do themes because I don't like being. If you do themes, you work yourself into a corner because you can't. You've got to keep thinking of something that's that theme. So I'll show you in a minute. I did do one show of birds that was all of the theme. I do a workshop in Fiji every year, and this is of there. They have the most incredible storms out to sea. And yeah, I do it in Savu Savu, and so I get a lot of ideas from that, because I go there every year and spend a week, you know, beside the sea. And that was actually in Fiji as well. There's a man lying on a lilo in the swimming pool, and all these dragonflies flying around him. So it's basically a autobiography of my life is my work, because I virtually paint everything that happens to me. This is another one from the zoo. This is a snail, but it's painted without stitching. I love that painting over there, over here. I do a lot of people, a lot of faces. I'm very attracted to doing faces. And in the mangroves, that's in Fiji. It's the island that I go to after Savu Savu is I'm surrounded by mangroves. There's the most beautiful storms out to sea there with these big clouds, and there's people swimming, wading in the water. I walk every morning beside the harbour, so with my dog. So a lot of the paintings are of all the boats and walking around the harbour with the dog. This was in my back garden. I've got a statue like that, and I had a family of bush turkeys. Suddenly, I live in suburban, and a family of bush turkeys decided to come into my garden. So this is called Visitors, and it's about the bush turkeys coming into my garden. It was just the weirdest thing to look out in the garden. There's two giant big bush turkeys. This was from when I went to India. I was in Udaipur, and the Maharanas used to run his horses around the lake every afternoon. These beautiful horses, and I just put the dog in to exaggerate the spotted thing of the horses. And they had these little boats like that on the lake every afternoon. I think that's left over from the bird show. So. Skinny dip. That's a piece of wood across the bottom of that one as well, so it's just exaggerating the perspective of what they're standing on. That's in the shade. That's a groper below. So it's all things that happen to me and feelings that I have. I think that's the end of that one. I don't know how you stop it.
Do you know the top red cross in the left-hand below that word preview?
Oh yeah, okay. Okay.
Yeah, that one. And then that'll get you back.
And then there's
I'll just 2010 on the...
Yeah, I'll flick through it. This is a show that I did about birds, of a theme. So this was that plane crash in America, that the plane was surrounded by all the geese. So every painting is about birds, which I don't normally do, but I just did it this time. But by the end of it, I was just like, oh my God, I never want to see another bird. So some of those ones that you saw before were from this show. That's when you're lying in the water and you see birds fly above you. This was out on a limb, another one. This is a whole lot of tiny little canvases. They're only about that big, little linen French canvases. And I just did a little bird on each one, but it took forever because it's so hard to stitch tiny little things like that. So. It's pigeons, feeding pigeons. That was up at Tea Gardens where my mother lives, and it was raining. I went up there for a week and it was raining the whole time. They have black swans on the river there, and heaps of pelicans flying everywhere over the top. Down at the park where I walk, they have lots of willy wagtails walking in the park, and that was I found also on a rubbish clean-up, you know, one of those games that children have, and yeah, so I just made it into a football match because it's about they all kicking the footballs. This is another series of the little tiny canvases this big. And that was a Barbie shoe, so it's just with stuff that I had, and that was a Wilma Flintstone doll thing that I had, but they're only this big, they're tiny. And that's off those old little iron animals from making models for railway models in the turn of the century. I'm always looking for stuff, and that was some plastic legs that I had. So, yeah. That's a stick, and the birds. So that's in front of the paintings behind it. And this is of my mother's dam at her place. It's very big. This painting. It's about 7 foot tall. So it's the same with that one. It's only the animals are stitched, and the birds and the flowers, and the painting behind it is just painted. Oh, I think that's it, isn't it? Oh, this is a sculpture I did of a brush turkey, and you can't really see it very well, but it's all made out of paintbrushes. I do quite a lot of sculpture. I do ceramic heads. As I said, anything that you have to build. That's finished too. So that's that. So my next show is in the 26th of November at Australian Galleries, and I'm working for that now. So working really hard to that, and I teach 3 days a week, so it's quite hard to get it all done. But
where do you teach it?
I teach at Willoughby Workshop and at National Art School. Does anyone have any more questions?
Okay. Do you work mainly from photographs or sketching?
No, I never draw. As I said, it's just all straight out of my head. Right. I just put the canvas up on the wall. My practice is I'm very incredibly disciplined, and I virtually do the same thing every day. So I work all day, every day, and even on the weekends. And I just put the canvas up on the wall, and I see something and draw something on it, and then I stitch it, and then I stretch my own canvases. So because I have to do the stitching, so I have to stretch my own canvases, and then I paint them. Yeah, I basically work on one at a time. I do one to the point where I've finished, think it's sort of finished, and then I put it to the side. And so I've got a little easel on the side here as well. I always do like a small one, which I can use leftover paint on. So I've basically got 3. The main one that I work on, the one that I think is finished, but I muck around with it, and the little one on the side. Yeah. And I have shows just about every year. So Sydney, Melbourne. So it's perpetual, but as I said, I'm pretty obsessive about it, and yeah, it's the air I breathe. I work all the time. So.
That was amazing. Thank you. What a wonderful life you have. Thank you very much.